Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo. In April of 1989, Mexican federal police followed a vehicle that ran through a checkpoint near Matamoros. They expected to find drugs. What they discovered instead was a ritual cauldron containing a human brain, and nearby, the remains of 15 people buried in shallow graves. The man responsible for this scene had been dead for less than a month by the time investigators pieced together the full scope of what had occurred at Rancho Santa Elena. But the network he built and the beliefs that drove him had been taking shape for over a decade. Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo was born on November 1, 1962, in Miami, Florida, to a 15-year-old Cuban immigrant. His biological father passed during his infancy. His mother remarried twice, and her second husband practiced Palo Mayombe, an Afro-Caribbean spiritual tradition, while also dealing narcotics. As a teenager in Miami, Constanzo apprenticed under a local Palo Mayombe priest. By 1983, he had pledged himself to Kadimpembe, a figure in that tradition often equated with the devil. He relocated to Mexico City and launched a fortune-telling business using tarot cards. His clientele grew to include wealthy drug traffickers, cartel figures, and corrupt Mexican police officers. At his peak, he maintained over 30 high-paying clients and owned a $60,000 condominium along with luxury vehicles. Central to his practice was the Nganga, a ritual cauldron filled with human remains believed to house spirits that would protect and empower his followers. He initially raided graveyards for bones, but escalated to live human sacrifice, believing freshly harvested remains produced more powerful spiritual protection. In 1986, Constanzo connected with the Calzada crime family. When they rejected his demand for full partnership, 7 Calzada family members were taken. Their remains were later found with fingers, toes, ears, and brains removed. In one case, an entire spine had been extracted. By 1988, operations had moved to Rancho Santa Elena, a compound less than a mile from the United States border. Victims were mostly individuals from vulnerable populations whose disappearances went unnoticed. On March 14, 1989, Constanzo ordered his followers to abduct an Anglo male for a more powerful ritual. Mark James Kilroy, a 21-year-old pre-med student at the University of Texas at Austin, was taken off a Matamoros street during spring break. He was subjected to approximately 12 hours of abuse before being harmed fatally with a machete. His brain was removed and placed in the Nganga. How does a case involving 60 disappearances in a single border town remain unsolved for weeks? The answer lay partly in jurisdictional complexity and partly in the sheer volume of missing persons along the border. But Mark Kilroy's uncle worked for United States Customs, and his case drew extraordinary attention. A task force formed in Brownsville, Texas. The case aired on America's Most Wanted on March 26th. The critical break came on April 1st, when Serafin Hernandez Garcia ran a federal police checkpoint without stopping, apparently believing Constanzo's potions rendered him invisible. Officers followed him directly to the ranch. Constanzo and several followers fled to an apartment in Mexico City. On May 6th, during an unrelated police canvass, Constanzo opened fire with a machine gun, triggering a 45-minute standoff. As police closed in, he handed his weapon to a follower named Alvaro de Leon Valdez and ordered him to end both his life and that of his lover, Martin Quintana Rodriguez. Valdez complied. 14 cult members were charged. Sara Maria Aldrete Villarreal, who had served as Constanzo's high priestess, was acquitted of his death but convicted of criminal association and later of multiple counts related to the ranch. She received a 62-year sentence, later reduced to 50 years. As of 2024, Aldrete remains incarcerated at Santa Martha Acatitla Women's Prison in Mexico City, with an expected release date of 2039. United States authorities have stated they intend to prosecute surviving members for Mark Kilroy's death, should any be released from Mexican custody. The belief that ritual sacrifice could provide protection proved false for Constanzo. But half a world away, another practitioner had already been acting on a similar conviction for over a decade. Ahmad Siraji. In 1986, a cattle breeder in North Sumatra claimed his deceased father appeared to him in a dream with a command: take the lives of 70 women and drink their saliva to become a powerful mystic healer. Over the next 11 years, he would attempt to fulfill that directive. Ahmad Siraji was born on January 10, 1949, in Pasar Rongkat, North Sumatra, Indonesia. He worked as a dukun, a traditional Javanese healer, in a Mandamai village near Medan. Despite being described as uneducated and rather poor, he was widely respected in his community for his willingness to help sick neighbors. His method was highly ritualized. He lured women seeking supernatural help with romantic or financial troubles to a sugarcane plantation near his home, claiming outdoor ceremonies were necessary. Once there, he instructed victims to stand in pre-dug holes and buried them to the waist, rendering them immobile. He then strangled them using an electrical cable, drank their saliva, stripped their clothing to accelerate decomposition, and fully buried them with heads pointing toward his house. He believed this orientation amplified the ritual's power. Between 1986 and 1997, Siraji claimed 42 victims, girls and women aged 11 to 30. Most were too embarrassed to tell anyone they were consulting a sorcerer. Many of their families had no idea where they had gone. On April 24, 1997, a 21-year-old woman named Sri Kamala Dewi asked a 15-year-old rickshaw driver to take her to the man she called Datuk. 3 days later, her body was found in the sugarcane field. The rickshaw driver told police he had dropped her at Siraji's house. Officers discovered Dewi's handbag, dress, and bracelet inside his home. What drives a man to believe that the systematic taking of human life could grant him supernatural abilities? Siraji himself offered one explanation to police. He stated that his father did not specifically advise him to take lives. He was told only to collect the saliva of 70 young women. He claimed he was simply trying to accomplish the task as quickly as possible. Arrested on April 30, 1997, Siraji confessed and revealed the locations of his victims. A full excavation of the plantation yielded 42 exhumed remains. Charged with 42 counts of premeditated taking of life under Article 340 of the Indonesian Criminal Code, Siraji was tried at the Lubuk Pakam District Court. On April 27, 1998, a 3-judge panel found him guilty and sentenced him to death by firing squad. The courtroom erupted in cheers. His wife Tumini was also sentenced to death, later commuted to life imprisonment. Both later retracted their confessions, claiming they were extracted under duress. Siraji's clemency petitions were rejected by President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono. Despite a last-minute appeal by Amnesty International, he was executed by firing squad on July 10, 2008, at 9:58 in the evening in a rubber plantation in Deli Serdang. Approximately 100 relatives of victims attempted to disrupt the funeral. Village residents refused to allow burial in Aman Damai. His body remained in a hospital morgue. Siraji's crimes were driven by a belief system rooted in traditional spirituality, however distorted. But in the summer of 1985, a very different kind of belief system was terrorizing the neighborhoods of Los Angeles. Richard Ramirez. A single fingerprint on a rearview mirror. That was what ended a 14-month spree that had claimed at least 13 lives and left Southern California in a state of terror. And the man it belonged to had come within weeks of never being identified at all. Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez was born on February 29, 1960, a leap day in El Paso, Texas. The youngest of 5 children born to Mexican immigrants, he sustained multiple head injuries before age 6 and later developed temporal lobe epilepsy. His father, a railway laborer, was a violent alcoholic. The most formative influence in his life was his cousin Miguel Valles, a Vietnam veteran suffering from schizophrenia and post-traumatic stress disorder. When Ramirez was 12, Valles showed him Polaroid photographs of war crimes he had committed overseas and taught him military stealth tactics. On May 4, 1975, 15-year-old Ramirez witnessed Valles fatally shoot his wife in the face. Ramirez began sleeping in cemeteries to escape his father. He started using LSD at 14 and developed an interest in Satanism. He dropped out of school in 9th grade and moved to California in 1982, where heavy cocaine use and burglaries consumed his life. His verified crime spree began on June 28, 1984, with the fatal harming of 79-year-old Jenny Vincow in Glassell Park. A fingerprint was recovered from the window screen. The spree escalated dramatically in 1985. On March the 17th, he harmed fatally 2 women within the same hour in separate locations. On March 27th, a couple in Whittier was found with an inverted cross carved into the wife's chest. Attacks continued through the spring and summer. He drew pentagrams at crime scenes, on victims' bodies, on bedroom walls. He forced survivors to swear their allegiance to Satan. How did a man committing attacks across multiple jurisdictions evade capture for over a year? Part of the answer was the randomness of his targeting. There was no clear pattern in victim selection, no geographic concentration that pointed to a single neighborhood. The attacks ranged from Arcadia to Mission Viejo, from Rosemed to Monterey Park. But investigators found one consistent piece of evidence: an Avia shoe print, size 11.5, appearing at multiple crime scenes. Only 6 pairs of that model had been sold in Los Angeles. The critical break came after his final attack on August 24, 1985, in Mission Viejo. A 13-year-old boy noted a partial license plate of a suspicious vehicle. The orange 1976 Toyota was found abandoned in Koreatown on August 28th. Despite Ramirez's attempt to wipe it clean, police recovered a single fingerprint from the rearview mirror. Using the newly available automated fingerprint identification system, they matched it to Ramirez, who was in the system from prior arrests. The database only included criminals born after January 1, 1960. Ramirez was born in February of that year. On August 31, 1985, Ramirez returned to Los Angeles unaware his photograph was on every front page. In a convenience store in East Los Angeles, elderly women recognized him. He fled, attempted 2 carjackings, and was chased and subdued by an angry mob of local residents. 7 police cars and a helicopter arrived. Officers effectively saved him from the crowd. The trial began January 30, 1989. Prosecutor Philip Halpin presented 137 witnesses and 521 exhibits. On September 20, 1989, Ramirez was convicted on all 43 charges, including 12 counts of first-degree taking of life. Judge Michael Tynan sentenced him to death. Ramirez responded by saying that death always went with the territory. Housed at San Quentin State Prison Ramirez married freelance editor Doreen Leoy on October 3, 1996. She reportedly left him around 2009 after DNA confirmed his involvement in an earlier case. The California Supreme Court upheld all convictions on August 7, 2006. Richard Ramirez passed away on June 7, 2013, at Marin General Hospital from complications of B-cell lymphoma. He was 53 and had been on death row for over 23 years. No one claimed his body. The satanic imagery Ramirez employed was theatrical, drawn from popular culture as much as any coherent belief system. But in the fall of 1996, a teenager in Kentucky was building something far more organized around similar imagery. Rod Ferrell. At 17 years old, he became the youngest person on Florida's death row. The crimes that put him there involved a ritual vocabulary drawn from role-playing games, a self-proclaimed vampire identity, and two people harmed fatally in their own home while their daughter waited outside in the car. Roderick Justin Ferrell was born on March 28, 1980, in Murray, Kentucky, to teenage parents. His father left for the military shortly after his birth. His mother, Sandra Gibson, raised Rod alone, supporting them through work as an exotic dancer. Gibson participated in vampirism herself and introduced Rod to the role-playing game Vampire: The Masquerade. Ferrell became obsessed with the vampire subculture, proclaiming himself Visago, a 500-year-old vampire. He was initiated into vampirism by an older boy named Stephen Murphy, who went by the name Jaden. In Kentucky, a group gathered at an abandoned structure nicknamed Hotel California in the Land, between the lakes area. Activities included drinking each other's blood through ritual cutting and what authorities described as death rituals. The broader group had an estimated 25 to 30 members. Among Ferrell's correspondents was a 15-year-old girl in Eustis, Florida, named Heather Wendorf. She had crossed over by drinking Ferrell's blood during a cemetery ritual. When Ferrell decided to travel to Florida, Heather knew he was coming. On November 25, 1996, the week of Thanksgiving, Ferrell and his associate Howard Scott Anderson entered the unlocked garage of the Wendorf home on Green Tree Lane. Ferrell picked up a crowbar. Richard Wendorf, 49, was asleep on the couch. Ferrell struck him 22 times. When Naoma Ruth Queen, 54, Richard's wife and Heather's mother, emerged from the shower, Ferrell harmed her as well. The force severed her brainstem. Richard's body bore burn marks in the shape of a V, Ferrell's symbol, accompanied by dots representing each clan member. What compels a 17-year-old to travel across state lines to commit acts of violence against people he has never met? The prosecution argued it was a combination of delusional self-importance and a desire for a vehicle and cash to continue a cross-country journey. The defense pointed to years of alleged abuse and a troubled home environment. Ferrell later alleged he was harmed at age 5 by his maternal grandfather, testimony corroborated at trial by a maternal aunt. The group fled toward New Orleans, using a stolen credit card for gas. On November 28, Thanksgiving Day, they were arrested in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, after one of the group called a relative who alerted police. Officers lured them to a Howard Johnson's hotel. On February 12, 1998, Ferrell pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree taking of life. Judge Jerry T. Lockett sentenced him to death, making him the youngest person on Florida's death row at the time. In November 2000, the Florida Supreme Court reduced his sentence to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, citing his age at the time of the crimes. In April 2020, the sentencing judge upheld this sentence, deeming Ferrell irreparably corrupt. In 2023, Farrell married while in prison. As of 2024, Rod Farrell remains incarcerated at the Northwest Florida Reception Center Annex, age approximately 44. Howard Scott Anderson was resentenced in December 2018 to 40 years and is currently at Calhoun Correctional Institution. Charity Kesey, Farrell's girlfriend, was sentenced to 10.5 years and released in March 2006. Dana Cooper received 17.5 years and was released in October 2011. Heather Wendorf was cleared by 2 grand juries and never charged. Farrell built his identity around fantasy and role-playing. But in the summer of 1984, on Long Island, a different kind of fantasy was about to have fatal consequences in a case that would help define an era of American moral panic. Ricky Kasso. In a wooded area of Northport, New York, under the influence of approximately 40 tabs of LSD and 17 bags of PCP, a 17-year-old demanded that his victim say he loved Satan. The victim initially replied that he loved his mother. What happened next became one of the most infamous cases of the 1980s and a catalyst for years of national anxiety about youth and the occult. Richard Allen Kasso Jr. was born on March 29, 1967, in Northport, New York, a village within the town of Huntington on Long Island. His father was a high school history teacher and football coach at affluent Cold Spring Harbor High School. Described as a model child and young athlete before drugs entered the picture, Kasso became a prolific user of LSD, PCP, and other hallucinogens. His enormous appetite for acid earned him the nickname the Acid King. He dropped out of Northport High School mid-sophomore year and was essentially homeless by spring of 1984, sleeping in local woods and cars after his parents repeatedly threw him out. They tried to have him involuntarily committed, but psychiatrists concluded he was neither psychotic nor a violent danger. Kasso expressed interest in Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible, participated in occult ceremonies, and celebrated Walpurgis Night at the Amityville Horror House in 1984. He was acquainted with a loosely organized group called the Knights of the Black Circle, a marijuana-selling circle that media later incorrectly labeled a satanic cult. The conflict that led to his crime originated when 17-year-old Gary Llers stole 10 bags of PCP from Kasso while he was passed out at a party. Llers returned 5 bags and promised to repay $50. Kasso beat Llers on 4 separate occasions over the debt, though Llers had substantially repaid him by mid-June. On June 19, 1984, Kasso, Llers, 18-year-old Jimmy Troiano, and 17-year-old Albert Quinones went to Astaquia Woods in Northport to get high. They consumed approximately 40 tabs of LSD and smoked 17 bags of PCP. In a drug-fueled confrontation, Kasso harmed Llers fatally with between 17 and 36 stab wounds. What happens to a case when the primary perpetrator never faces trial? Kasso bragged to multiple acquaintances about what he had done. He allegedly brought several people to view Llers's decomposing remains. An anonymous female tipster reported the incident to police on July 1, 1984. The body was recovered on July 4th using police dogs. Kasso and Troiano were arrested July 5th, found passed out in a car. Both waived their right to attorneys and confessed. On July 7th, 2 days after his arrest, Ricky Kasso hanged himself in his cell at the Suffolk County Jail in Riverhead, New York, using a bedsheet tied to a bar. He was 17 years old. Jimmy Troiano signed 2 confessions but recanted both. Tried for second-degree taking of life in April 1985, his defense argued that hallucinogenic drugs made it impossible to determine what had happened. Key witness Albert Quinones gave contradictory accounts. The jury acquitted Troiano after 3 days of deliberation. The case became a major catalyst of what would later be termed the Satanic Panic era. It was featured on ABC's 2020 and Geraldo Rivera's Devil Worship, exposing Satan's underground. It prompted congressional debates about satanic symbolism in music. The phrase, "Say you love Satan," became iconic, appearing in documentaries and books for decades afterward. Jesse P. Pollock's definitive 2018 book, The Acid King, and the 2021 documentary of the same name attempted to place the case in proper context, separating the moral panic from the reality of drug abuse and untreated mental illness. The facts of the Caso case remain disturbing, but the interpretation of those facts and what they said about American youth culture became a story unto itself, one that would shape public discourse for years to come. If you're liking this video and you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. We drop new cases every day. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Tomás Maldonado Llers. For 17 years, women in Barranquilla, Colombia, disappeared without explanation. Their bodies, when found, bore symbols carved into flesh. And the man responsible was not only free during that entire period, but he had already served time for attempted taking of life before he began. Tomás Manuel Maldonado Llers was born in 1971 in Colombia. He lived in the Barrio El Milagro neighborhood of Barranquilla. In 1996, a court sentenced him to 12 years, 2 months, and 20 days for attempted homicide. He served his time and was released. By 2002, he had returned to the streets of Barranquilla. But something had shifted in his practices. He had adopted rituals rooted in Satanism, complete with elaborate symbols and sacrificial timing. Most of his crimes would occur before October 31st, believed to be ritualistic offerings timed to acquire occult power. On September 2nd, 2002, Rolando Rufan, Romero, a close friend of Maldonado, disappeared. His body was found 3 days later with 25 stab wounds and the letter Z carved on his forehead. On September 13th, 15-year-old student Jason Ariza Banquez vanished. His body was found on the highway to Salgar 5 days later. In October, 17-year-old Miguel Alfonso Gil Rodriguez was found with signs of torture and mutilation. On October 10th, 2002, Maldonado picked up his romantic partner, Yadira Martinez Gutierrez, on his motorcycle. She was never seen again. He carved satanic symbols on victims' bodies, including the sign of Vur, inverted pentagrams, hexagrams, and the letter Z. He amputated victims' middle and ring fingers to forcibly create the sign of Vur hand gesture, associated with devil worship. Victims were dressed in black, and satanic writings were found in sand near crime scenes. Why did it take nearly 2 decades for investigators to connect these cases? The part of the answer lies in the archiving system. The Fiscalia had closed multiple cases due to insufficient evidence. Without modern technology, there was no way to definitively link the victims to a single perpetrator. The pattern existed, but it remained invisible in the paperwork. Additional victims accumulated over the years. Aida Rocio Antolínez Lizarazo in 2003, Yilibeth Irina Manjares Almarales in 2004. The final known victim was Brenda Inés Pájaro Bruno, a 44-year-old mother of 4, harmed on July 25, 2018. Her body was found a month later with a fractured skull and evidence of assault. The Brenda Pájaro case benefited from modern technology. Security cameras captured her arriving at an overgrown area with Maldonado in a van. He exited alone over an hour later. Cell phone records confirmed the timeline. Maldonado was captured in February 2019 at his home. Upon his arrest, the Fiscalia reopened, archived cases, and discovered the connecting patterns across all victims. In August 2023, he was convicted of aggravated femicide for Brenda Pajaro and sentenced to 46 years in prison, upheld on appeal by the Sala Penal del Tribunal Superior de Barranquilla. In a separate proceeding, he received 31 years and 3 months for the forced disappearance of Yadira Martinez Gutierrez. As of 2024, Tomás Maldonado Llers remains incarcerated at the Cárcel Modelo de Barranquilla and faces at least 10 additional ongoing criminal proceedings. He is linked to at least 10 total victims, including 6 men and multiple women. The ritualistic elements in Maldonado's crimes were deliberate and sustained over nearly 2 decades. But in 2008, a teenager in Brazil compressed an equally disturbing pattern into a single summer. Dionathan Celestrino. Dionathan Celestrino was born on January 5, 1992, in Rio Brilhante, Mato Grosso do Sul, Brazil. A self-described Gothic teenager, he slept in cemeteries, expressed interest in necrophilia and blood, and was quiet in school despite earning good grades. He became the leader of his own cult of Satan worshippers and idolized Brazilian serial figure Francisco de Assis Pereira, known as the Park Maniac. He kept a poster of Pereira in his room and explicitly stated he wanted to surpass his body count. His method involved abducting victims at knife point and interrogating them about their belief in God and their personal history. If he deemed them impure, he took their lives through asphyxiation. All his crimes occurred during Brazilian winter between July and October of 2008. On July 2, 2008, 33-year-old Catalino Gardena, a bricklayer and Celestrino's neighbor, became the first victim. He was asphyxiated with a plastic bag and stabbed. His body was posed in the cross position with a paper reading INRI. On August 24th, 22-year-old Leticia Neves de Oliveira, a gas station attendant, was strangled. Her body was found posed in cross formation on a grave in a cemetery. On October 3rd, Gleice Kelly da Silva was found at an abandoned construction site, posed in the cross position with a note reading Corpse of Thor. One potential victim, a woman known only as Carla, passed his interrogation and was spared. According to Celestrino's own records, she was the only one. What happens when a juvenile commits crimes of this nature under a legal system designed for rehabilitation? The critical break came when Celestrino commented on an Orkut social media post commemorating Gleice Kelly. Under the handle DogHell666, he wrote, "Dead people cannot receive replies, you sickos." Police traced the account and Gleice's phone records to Celestrino. His fingerprint was also found on her bicycle. Arrested on October 9, 2008, police found in his room Gleice's blouse, necklaces belonging to victims, a poster of his serial idol, knives, surgical gloves, and a paper listing Catalino dead, Leticia dead, Carla saved. His diary contained the words, "In life and death, I am a serial killer." Because Celestrino was a juvenile at the time of his crimes, Brazil's child and adolescent statute limited his internment to a maximum of 3 years, with mandatory release by age 21. He served his initial internment from 2008 to 2011 at the UNE de Ponta Porã. Diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and chronic psychopathy, he was declared legally interdicted in 2011. Compulsory psychiatric internment was ordered as a security measure. He escaped in March 2013 with help from his mother and aunt, fleeing to Paraguay. He was recaptured on April 27, 2013. Since 2 1014. Celestino has been held at the Instituto Penal de Campo Grande in the psychiatric wing. He is evaluated by psychiatric experts every 6 months. No evaluator has ever declared him fit for release. A January 2023 evaluation diagnosed antisocial personality disorder comorbid with borderline personality disorder, classifying him as moderate high dangerousness. He assaulted a prison guard in September 2023 and threw urine at another guard in September 2024. As of 2025, Jonathan Celestino remains incarcerated indefinitely with no release date, age approximately 34. Celestino acted alone, driven by personal belief and idol worship. But in the early 1980s in Chicago, a group of men operated together under the direction of a single leader. Chicago Ripper Crew. A woman survived having her left breast amputated with a wire garrote. Her detailed descriptions of her attackers and their vehicle led police to a group of men who, according to their own confessions, conducted rituals in an attic chapel decorated with red and black crosses. The physical evidence of that chapel was never recovered. The confessions, however, were enough. Robin Gecht was born on November 30th, 1953. He worked as a carpenter and handyman, and for a time served as a construction subcontractor for PDM Contractors, a company owned by John Wayne Gacy. No criminal connection to Gacy's crimes was ever established, but the employment relationship was factual. Gecht had prior convictions, including contributing to the sexual delinquency of a minor, unlawful use of a weapon, and aggravated battery in a stabbing. Neighbors described a man with a strange, intimidating power and warned detectives to never look into his eyes. The 3 men who followed him were Edward Spreitzer, born January 5, 1961, and brothers Andrew and Thomas Cocorales, born July 18, 1963, and July 10, 1960, respectively. Authorities described them as vulnerable individuals whom Gecht easily manipulated. Thomas Cocorales had a tested IQ of 75. According to confessions from Thomas Cocorales and Spreitzer, Gecht maintained a satanic chapel in his attic with 6 red and black crosses painted on the walls, an altar with a red tablecloth and lit candles. Gecht would read from the Satanic Bible during their acts. In every case, they would amputate the victim's left breast with a wire garrote while the victim was still alive. Thomas claimed he once saw 15 breasts stored in a box in the attic. Police noted these claims came only from confessions. No physical evidence of the altar or box was recovered. On May 23, 1981, 28-year-old Linda Sutton became the first known victim found with her left breast amputated. Through 1981 and 1982, attacks continued. On June 13, 1982, a woman named Angel York survived despite having her left breast slashed. On October 6, 1982, 18-year-old Beverly Washington survived despite having her left breast amputated. Her testimony was the critical break. How did 4 men evade detection while committing a series of attacks with identical signatures? Part of the answer was the time it took for survivors to emerge who could provide detailed accounts. Washington's survival and her detailed descriptions of the attackers and their distinctive red Dodge van led police to Edward Spreitzer, then to Robin Gecht. Gecht was first arrested on October 20, 1982, but released on bond. After further investigation, he was rearrested on November 5th. Andrew Cocorales was arrested November 7th and confessed along with Spreitzer to up to 17 fatal acts. Thomas Cocorales was arrested November 12th and provided the most detailed confessions about the Satanic Chapel. Gecht was the only member who never confessed and maintained his innocence. Robin Gecht was never tried for any of the fatal acts due to lack of physical evidence. He was convicted in 1983 of attempted taking of life, aggravated kidnapping, deviant sexual assault, and rape in the Beverly, Washington case. He received 120 years in prison. His projected parole date is October 10, 2042. He would be 88 years old. He is currently at Menard Correctional Center. Edward Spreitzer pleaded guilty to 4 fatal acts and was sentenced to life without parole in 1984. He was separately sentenced to death for Linda Sutton's case in 1986. That death sentence was commuted to life without parole by Governor George H. Ryan in January 2003 as part of a blanket commutation of all 167 Illinois death row sentences. He remains incarcerated. Andrew Kokorales was convicted and sentenced to death for the Lorraine Borowski case on April 30, 1987. He was executed by lethal injection on March 17, 1999, at Tams Correctional Center. He declined a last meal. His last words addressed the Borowski family: "I am truly sorry for your loss." He was the last person executed in Illinois before Governor Ryan imposed a moratorium. The death penalty was abolished in Illinois in 2011. Thomas Kokorales was initially sentenced to life, but won a new trial on appeal. He pleaded guilty in exchange for a 70-year sentence. Under old Illinois sentencing guidelines, he was eligible for release after serving half his sentence. He was released from prison on March 29, 2019, sparking massive public outrage. As of August 2024, he resides at Peoria Pathway Ministries in Peoria, Illinois, required to register as a sex offender and check in with police quarterly. The Chicago Ripper crew operated as a small, tight-knit group under one leader's direction. But in the late 1960s, a different kind of leader was building something far larger in the canyons of Los Angeles. Charles Manson. He never personally took a life during the crimes that made him infamous. The people who followed his orders did, and the ideology that drove those crimes was a hallucinatory interpretation of a Beatles album. Charles Mills Maddox was born on November 12, 1934, at Cincinnati General Hospital, to 16-year-old Ada Kathleen Maddox. His biological father was a transient laborer who disappeared. When Kathleen was sentenced to 5 years for robbery in 1939, Charles was placed with relatives in West Virginia. By age 32, Manson had spent more than half his life in institutions: juvenile reformatories, federal prisons, and penitentiaries. He accumulated convictions for petty larceny, armed robbery, burglary, auto theft, check forging, and pimping. At McNeil Island Federal Penitentiary from 1960 to 1967, he studied philosophy, learned guitar from bank robber Alvin Karpis, and developed the manipulative techniques he would deploy on followers. Released on March 22, 1967, Manson moved to San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district during the Summer of Love. His first follower was Mary Bruner, a UC Berkeley Library employee. The group grew to approximately 100 followers, with 30 or more dedicated core members, primarily young women from middle-class backgrounds. By August 1968, the family had established their base at Spahn Ranch, a decrepit former movie set in Los Angeles County. Manson's ideology centered on an apocalyptic race war he called Helter Skelter, named after a Beatles song from the 1968 White Album. He interpreted multiple songs from that album as hidden messages confirming his prophecy. Black Americans would rise against whites, win but be unable to govern, and the family would emerge from hiding in Death Valley caves to rule the world. On July 25th through 27th, 1969, Bobby Beausoleil, Susan Atkins, and Mary Brunner went to the home of musician Gary Hinman. Manson arrived with a samurai sword and slashed Hinman's face. On July 27th, Beausoleil fatally stabbed Hinman. Political Piggy was written in blood on the wall with a paw print to implicate the Black Panthers. On the night of August 8th through 9th, 1969, under Manson's orders to totally destroy everyone at 10050 Cielo Drive, Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian entered the property. 5 lives were taken. 26-year-old actress Sharon Tate, who was 8.5 months pregnant, 35-year-old celebrity hairstylist Jay Sebring, 25-year-old coffee heiress Abigail Folger, 32-year-old writer Wojciech Frykowski, and 18-year-old Stephen Parent, who was visiting the guest house caretaker. Atkins wrote the word pig on the front door in Tate's blood. The following night, Manson himself entered the home of Leno LaBianca, 44, and Rosemary LaBianca, 38. He tied the couple, covered their heads with pillowcases, then left Watson, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten to carry out the fatal acts. Death to pigs was written in blood on the wall. Rise was written on another wall. Helter Skelter, misspelled, was written on the refrigerator. War was carved on Leno's stomach. What transforms alienated young people into instruments of violence for a charismatic leader? The case broke when Susan Atkins, jailed on unrelated charges in November 1969, boasted to cellmates about participation in the Tate events. Prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi, with a record of 105 convictions in 106 felony trials, was assigned on November 18th. The trial began June 15, 1970, before Judge Charles Older. Manson carved an X into his forehead, later altered to a swastika. Female co-defendants followed suit. Family members camped outside daily. Defendants disrupted proceedings through singing, lunging at witnesses, and grabbing papers. On January 25, 1971, all 4 defendants were found guilty of first-degree taking of life. On March 29th, all were sentenced to death. In 1972, California's Supreme Court invalidated the death penalty, and all sentences were commuted to life with the possibility of parole. Manson was denied parole 12 times between 1978 and 2012. He accumulated 108 serious disciplinary violations. Charles Manson passed away on November 19, 2017, at age 83, from cardiac arrest and respiratory failure secondary to metastatic colon cancer. As of early 2026, Leslie Van Houten was paroled on July 11, 2023, age 73, after 53 years. Patricia Krenwinkel remains incarcerated at age 77, the longest-serving woman in California prisons. Charles Tex Watson remains incarcerated at Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility, denied parole 18 times, with his next hearing scheduled for October 2026. Steve Clem Grogan was paroled in 1985, the first convicted Manson participant released. The Manson family operated through the force of a single personality imposing his will on vulnerable followers. But in Oklahoma in the mid-1980s, a different kind of case was unfolding, one that would raise questions about juvenile justice that persist to this day. Sean Sellers. He was the first person executed in the United States for crimes committed under the age of 17 since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. By the time he faced lethal injection, He had spent over a decade on death row and become a born-again Christian who counseled troubled youth. None of that changed the outcome. Sean Richard Llers was born on May 18, 1969, in Corcoran, California, to 16-year-old Vonda Blackwell and Richard C. Llers, described as an unstable alcoholic who left when Sean was 3 or 4 years old. His mother married Paul Lee Bellofato, a truck driver and reported former Green Beret. The couple frequently worked cross-country hauls, leaving Sean with relatives. By age 16, he had moved approximately 30 times. Llers' occult interest began in his early teens. By age 14, he was experimenting with satanic theology. In 1984, at age 15, he performed a self-conducted satanic baptism and devoted his soul to Satan through rituals including self-mutilation and blood consumption. He claimed to have read Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible hundreds of times. He wrote in his own blood, "I renounce God, I renounce Christ, I will serve only Satan. To my enemies, death." He combined Dungeons and Dragons, ninjutsu, and satanic ritual into a group called the Elimination, aimed at eliminating what he called the hypocritical Christian community. He brought a satanic Bible to classes at Putnam City North High School and drank his own blood during rituals. He claimed possession by a demon named Ezurate. On September 8, 1985, Llers, age 16, fatally harmed Robert Paul Bauer, a convenience store clerk in Oklahoma City. Bauer had reportedly refused to sell beer to Llers' friend, Richard Howard. Llers later wrote that he laughed after shooting Robert Bauer, giggling like it was a fantastic prank. The case initially went unsolved and was treated as a robbery. On March 5, 1986, Llers, still 16, fatally harmed his mother Vonda Bellofato, age 32, and stepfather Paul Lee Bellofato, age 43, as they slept. He had previously attempted to poison his mother with rat poison. The motive reportedly stemmed from conflict over his girlfriend. Wearing only black underwear to limit blood evidence, he used his stepfather's .44 caliber revolver, first harming Lee, then Vonda when the noise woke her. He staged the scene to appear as an intrusion. After the Bellofato case, Llers went to Richard Howard's home and described what he had done. Once in custody, he confessed to the Bauer case as well. What weight should juvenile status carry when the crimes involved are premeditated and brutal? In September 1986, tried as an adult in Oklahoma County District Court, Llers was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree taking of life. His defense argued he was a victim of Satanism, that Dungeons and Dragons dictated his actions, and that he was legally unconscious due to demonic possession. The jury rejected all defense claims. He was sentenced to death on October 2, 1986. At the time, Oklahoma law did not offer life without parole as an alternative. Llers' direct appeal was affirmed by the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals in 1991. In 1992, 7 years after the crimes, a defense-sponsored evaluation diagnosed him with multiple personality disorder, now called dissociative identity disorder. Psychologists opined an alter personality was in control during the crimes. Prison officials reported seeing Llers rehearsing evidence of mental illness. The 10th Circuit Court of Appeals acknowledged in 1998. It firmly appears that petitioners' claims are not fanciful. Indeed, they are supported by significant evidence the person facing death for 3 crimes is not the person who committed the crime. We are not unmoved. However, the court ruled the MPD claim was raised too late and denied the appeal. The United States Supreme Court declined to hear the case the night before execution. Llers reported converting to Christianity shortly after arrest in 1986. From prison, he appeared on The Oprah Winfrey Show and Geraldo Rivera's Satanism special, counseled troubled youth, and published an autobiography titled Web of Darkness in 1990. His case drew support from the European Union, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the American Bar Association, Bianca Jagger, and Amnesty International. The Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board refused clemency, and Governor Frank Keating declined to intervene. Sean Llers was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester at 12:17 in the morning on February 4, 1999. His last meal was Chinese food. His final words addressed his step-siblings and ended with him singing, "Set my spirit free that I might praise thee." He was only the second person since 1959 to be executed in the United States for crimes committed under the age of 17. His execution galvanized international criticism that contributed to the 2005 United States Supreme Court ruling in Roper versus Simmons, which declared it unconstitutional to execute anyone for crimes committed under the age of 18. 10 cases spanning decades and continents, each driven by belief systems twisted beyond recognition. The rituals differed, but the devastation they caused did not. Thanks for watching. Click here for the next video.